Stay tuned to Voice of Rio as we learn about how to tell a good, scary story.
Hello and welcome to another episode. I guess it's an episode of the Voice of Rio Grande. I'm Dr. Donna Mitchell, Dean of the College of Professional and Technical Studies, along with Dr. Heather Duda, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Donna. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. You know, it's that time of year. It's Halloween time.
I know, and I'm so happy all my body parts show this time rather than just my head.
I agree. That was fun, but I felt that my head was getting a little bit, too large there and getting a mind of its own.
We didn't want to be lightheaded, right?
Not at all.
Well, it's a beautiful day on campus. I know I say that just about every time, but every day on campus it seems it's beautiful. The sun's shining, and we have so many activities going on that I can't even keep track of everything.
It's a busy social calendar for folks here at Rio this time of year.
And we even have auditions for an opera coming up.
We do, and so I suppose we'll be probably talking about that in a few months and sharing some more information.
And maybe even getting a little excerpt or somebody to come in and talk with us about it.
That would be great.
Well, we're fortunate today to have a storyteller with us.
I know, I'm very excited. We have Frank McGarvey, who is a storyteller, who is going to join us from afar. And so we're excited to have him on. And we're hoping that we can start. Frank, if you would be so kind as to tell everyone hello and a little bit about yourself to get us started.
Hi, people. I'm Frank McGarvey. I go by the name Frank because many times people can't pronounce McGarvey right. It comes out McGarbage or whatever. Anyway, hi. I retired from the Postal Service 25 years ago. And while I was there at the Postal Service, I used to have to fly back and forth to Washington, D.C. And I never minded that because that was just a 1-hour flight. I always carried a paperback book with me, and I'd sit down and read it, and it didn't take long at all before we'd be landing. The only thing I liked better than having the peace and quiet of reading a book would be if I happened to have somebody come in and sit down next to me that was personable and we could chat. On this particular occasion, in came this pretty young thing, and I gave her what I hoped was a fatherly smile because she was a young thing. She had just graduated from high school. And I noticed that as she came up the aisle there was hardly anybody on the plane that noticed her. They were all so busy on their computers. I never worked on the computers on the plane. And she smiled at me, and I let her in to sit down. And she saw that I was reading this book, and she says, "Oh, I just love that author. I've read so many of his books." I said, "Well, I like it. I notice you have a book in your hand there, too. A Wrinkle in Time. Madeline L'Engle? Is that good? I've never read that." "Oh, you have to read it. I just love this. I've read this 3 times, and I took it with me to be able to read when I get into D.C. My aunt sent me the money for the airplane ticket to come to D.C. For my graduation." "Oh, that's nice. I am just going to go to every monument in the city. I'm going to go through all the Smithsonian." By the time she got done telling me what she was going to be doing, I was worn out. She said, then she got up and left, and she left her book sitting there on the seat. She went to the back of the plane, and while she was back there, the fasten seatbelt sign came on. And he hadn't been back yet. Finally, we started to descend. got hold of one of the stewards there and said, would you please check on my young friend? It went in the back of the plane there and she hadn't come back. Well, she went back and checked. When she came out, she says, well, I'm sorry, sir, but there's no one back there. Well, I didn't know what to make of that. I knew she went back there and I didn't see her come forward. And pretty soon we started deplaying. I looked over on that seat and picked up the book that she'd left, opened the page there and saw that she had an address sticker on it. And okay, she's in Columbus. When I get back, I'll return the book to her because she liked it real well. And I went on home, went back, 3 days there in DC in different meetings, and you want to know something about boring. You want to talk about a postal meeting. But we had, one night, I decided to go in and take a walk. That was one of the most enjoyable things that I did there because, well, never mind why. But I walked and walked, and on this particular time, I went to the Lincoln Memorial. And as I started up the steps, I saw this young girl standing up there. And I hurried, but by the time I got up there, she was gone. That was okay. I didn't have the book with me anyway. I'll just take it back to her when we get home. Well, whenever I traveled, my wife always kept the Dispatch, the local paper, so that I could catch up on all the local news. I could always get the world news there, but I couldn't get the local news. And that when I got home, I started reading through some of the papers, and on the front page of the newspaper dated the day after I left, and there was a picture of a mangled car and a picture of a young girl. And it was the girl that had sat next to me. That didn't make sense to me. She was so vibrant, she couldn't have been killed in a car accident on the day that we left. I went into my luggage, pulled out the book that she gave me. And I opened it up, and sure enough, there was her address label in there. But then something that I hadn't seen before, written on the inside flap, was, Frank, read this to the children. That didn't make any sense to me. How could that possibly have been? Well, time passed. I retired. I started telling stories to kids. I started reading to kids to encourage them to read. And the first story that I told was A Wrinkle in Time. So that's just how we can start off the program here.
Well, thank you.
That was wonderful.
Could you give our readers a few tips on what it takes to be a good storyteller?
A lot of practice, a lot of people, a lot of good, favorable audiences. Mm-hmm. You know, your important voice is so important. And sometimes that doesn't work out too well, especially at this time of year when all of a sudden you get colds and sniffles and so on. As far as clothing, well, they tell me that it's better to wear neutral colors. I don't know about that. For ghost stories and that, I like black. Mm-hmm. Set the tone. Posture, generally want to keep your posture pretty good. For one thing, it helps you to be able to breathe and be able to project. Timing, yeah, that's really a good trick. If you can get your timing down, when you start to tell the story, when you can take a breath and when you can keep going, it's good to have that. Now, when you do ghost stories, it's best if you know your audience. And if you don't know your audience, maybe you better check them for clues. You want to watch to see if you're scaring the little ones too much. Then you got to tone it back. Or you want to see if they're not getting enough of a scare. And then you can pour it on. I can recall one time I went into a library and the librarian's 2 kids were in there. They were high school kids, just probably freshman or sophomore. And they came up and said, "You're not going to scare us." It took 3 minutes after I started, and they were ready to leave. They were just a little bit, I probably went a little bit overboard because they dared me. So, but sometimes when you're telling spooky tales, it's a really good idea to put some humor into the tales. Because that way they can go ahead and say, "Well, that's good. I'm not scared. That's all right. Fine. I'm splendid. That's all right. He can't scare me." And then there's always a thing that I have learned from one of our famous storytellers, that if the people, the kids particularly, are afraid to go to bed at night, and to take off their shoes and not leave them in the living room, but to take them into their bedroom. Put one shoe pointing underneath the bed and the other shoe pointing out the door. Then if any ghostly, ghastly thing ever comes in, it'll scratch its head, if it has one. It'll look at those shoes, try to figure out whether it was coming or going. Turn around, leave your room, leave your house, and never come back again. And I know that this works. I'm an old man, and I've been doing this for many, many years. And I've never been bothered by any monsters other than my 12 grandkids.
That's a great way to keep the children from throwing their shoes down in another room.
I remember telling this to one class, and the mother told me that, well, she was the teacher, and she says, "I always have my kids put their shoes right in one particular place so that they can get them fast in the morning. But now my kids won't put them there." And they put them underneath their bed, but they know where they are, so that's all right with me.
That's right.
Those kids are quite old now, in the mid-20s. As I say, I've been telling for a while.
Where do you draw your inspiration from for your stories?
Oh, I don't know. I guess out of my own screwed up head. But I read a lot of books. I really like, I remember hearing R.L. Stine back in 1994, when I started reading to the kids. Actually 93, but in 94, that's when he was the top seller in the New York Times book list. He sold more books than anybody else. And that went on for 6 months. Nobody topped him, because these books were kids' books, goosebump books.
Right.
And they loved them. And they sold a lot of them. The kids enjoyed them so much. So did I. I even went and saw the movie. I haven't seen the second one, but I did see the first one. It was fun. So, again, one of the things I'd like to stress, though, is know your audience. And if you don't know your audience, watch them closely. See how you're coming across to them so that you can give them what they want, what they need, and you know what can happen if you don't pay attention to your audience. You can get them scared, and you don't really. They all say they want to be scared, but what they want to be is scared and safe.
Right.
And you really want to leave them with the idea that everything is okay. For example, one of the folk tales, Taily-po. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
Taily-po means nothing more than my poor little tale. And you go through and you tell them the scary story, and it is a pretty scary story if you use your voice to scare. Now, I've known a couple other storytellers that tell that and make it a comedy, and they do an extremely good job on it. But I prefer the spooky tales. And when we end that story, I always say that if you were to go down into the hills of eastern Tennessee, notice we're not talking about right around Columbus or around Rio Grande, you're talking about someplace farther away. And that way, they're not so worried about what might happen to them because that thing's not around here. So you want to put them at ease when you finish up your stories.
Good point. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Me neither. Me neither. Do you have a favorite audience or a favorite venue in which to tell your stories?
Well, I don't know. I just finished going to a couple of, I hate to say it, but old age homes, and I feel very comfortable there now. They've been a pretty good audience too, as long as you realize that you're not going to scare them like the kids. I love telling to children, preferably middle school or high school, but whatever. I really have a hard time with the very young ones, mind you. I remember telling their stories to one preschool group, and my storytelling was interrupted several times as the teachers came to change the diapers. So I don't do that anymore.
Understandable.
Yeah. Or I would think that maybe they'd be a little more energetic in asking questions in the middle of a story than some of their older counterparts.
But I do enjoy telling to middle school and high school, and even the college kids, Wittenberg and Rio Grande, and also to southern Mississippi. Although when I went down there, I wasn't telling to the students, I was telling to librarians. And the next morning, one of the librarians said, I was afraid to walk to my room. I guess I did the job then.
I guess you did. Do you have another short story you could share with us?
Well, let's see. I should have written that down. I didn't think we were going this long.
And if you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, we can keep asking you questions if that's easier.
Well, I have one story that I kind of like. and I hope, therefore, that other people do as well. When I was 12 years old, Bob was my best friend. We went everywhere together. If you saw Bob, you saw me. If you saw me, you saw Bob. We were inseparable. And one day after school, he says, "Frank, I gotta go and spend the night at the McGregor house." "Well, are you out of your mind? Nobody goes to the McGregor house. You know what they say about that place, don't you?" "Frank, I've gotta do it." "Well, why you gotta do it?" "The big guys, they dared me." "Well, that doesn't mean anything. Better to be a live coward than a dead duck." "Oh, Frank, are you the best friend?" "Yeah." "Are you going to come and spend the night there with me?" "Oh, all right." So after supper, Bob came over to the house. He had a blanket rolled up over his shoulder. He had a flashlight in his back pocket. "You ready to go, Frank?" I think I'm gonna make some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to take with us." I figured I'd like to delay that as long as I could. So I took my time making the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, wrapped them up in wax paper, put them inside my blankets, threw my blankets over my shoulder. Then I went over to the drawer and pulled out a stub of a candle and got some kitchen matches down, stuck them in my pocket. Oh, it was good. We started walking. It wasn't very far to the McGregor house. It was a big old place. They had a tall wrought iron fence all around it. When we got to the front gate, it had been so long since it had been opened, they knew that couldn't get in. It had been rusted shut. "Bob, come on, we gotta go home. There's no sense in going in here. We can't even get into this place." "Frank, let's see if there's an area where we can get in around the back here." So we walked around the back. The fence was leaning in a little bit. I was a whole lot thin than I am now, so we squeezed through. Bob walked around to the front. We went up on the steps, but the door had been nailed shut. "Oh, we can't even get in here. Let's go on home." "Oh, now, wait a minute. Let's look around. Maybe one of these boards on the windows might be loose." We walked around until we came to the back. There, by the back door, was a small window, kind of high up. One of the boards on that was loose, and Bob grabbed hold of it and ripped it off. "Frank, give me a boost." So I got down, I gave him a boost. And he climbed in that window and he turned around and reached his hands out and says, "Here, Frank, give me your hands." Okay. He grabbed hold of my hands and he pulled and I climbed and I got in and we were in a little pantry off the kitchen. Oh, to keep the food stuff and the pots and pans, but no, there were no food items in there. There were no pots. There was nothing but dust and cobwebs. Cobwebs sticking to my face, sticking to my arms. I couldn't move without the cobwebs. And Bob reached into his pocket, pulled out the flashlight, pointed it down on the floor, and I could see his footprints in the dust. We walked on into the kitchen. "Bob, look at that! That knife in the countertop there, it's got blood on it." Frank. Don't be such a chicken. That's nothing but rust. I don't think so. He walked on through the kitchen into the dining area where there was broken down table, broken down chairs. I followed him into the living room. There were two big overstuffed chairs covered with cobwebs. I said, Bob, why don't we knock some of these cobwebs out and we can sit down here, right in front of this fireplace. Well, there were bricks from the chimney that had fallen down onto the fire on the hearth. So, Bob, want to sit down here and we'll just eat our peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? Wait, Frank, we haven't seen what's upstairs yet. I'm not going upstairs. No, I told you I'd come and spend the night with you here, but I'll be darned if I'm going to go upstairs. Well, Frank, that's all right. You don't have to. I'm going upstairs. You can stay down here by yourself. Oh, no, I couldn't. And as he started up those steps, I was practically in his back pocket. We got up to the second floor there, and there was a door over here that was open and one over here that was open. And in this door here, in this room, there was a small bed and a baseball bat. We walked across the hall to the other room. The door was open, and there was a small bed and a baby buggy. And in that baby buggy, there was a doll baby whose face was crumbling, whose gown was rotting away. And it lay there, staring up through the cobwebs to the ceiling. Bob, let's go back downstairs. We haven't seen what's down in that room down at the end of the hall. Well, we don't gotta do that. But no, Bob, he had to walk. He walked down to that room and he managed to push that door open. Took his flashlight and pointed it around. Bob, look at that rocking chair. It's rocking and there's nobody in it. Oh, Frank, that's nothing but the wind. There wasn't any wind in the house. There was hardly a breath of air in that room. And he pointed his flashlight around, and there was a big four-poster bed. The canopy from that bed had fallen down so that I couldn't see whether there was anyone or anything in that bed. Bob, I'm gonna go back downstairs. And I turned around and I started to walk. And I saw the most ugly face I'd ever seen in my life. And I screamed bloody murder, and Bob was standing behind me. Frank, you're such a coward. That's a mirror. You scared yourself. If kids are young, that's where I stop. But if they're not, I give them the rest of the story. When I got tired of being laughed at, I stomped down the stairs and I plopped myself down in a chair and I sat there with my arms folded. Bob knew I was angry, so he came down. He wiped off the one seat, sat down. I said nothing. He said nothing. Bob, you want a sandwich? So he and I sat there and ate the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Then what do you suppose we did? We're two 12-year-old boys in a haunted house. We told ghost stories. He told me about the hairy toe, and I told him about the dancing skeleton, and he just, I just knew that there was no way in the world I was going to go to sleep that night. And we sat there, peaceful and quiet, and somehow or another, I must have fallen asleep.
And we'll have to end right there, and our audience will have to wonder what happened at the end of that story. We're out of time, but thank you so much for spending time with us today, Frank.
All right.
I was so enthralled in the story, I didn't even realize what time it was getting. Frank, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.
And thank you for joining us on the Voice of Rio Grande.
And got to thank Mike and any about getting the program hooked up there.